You signed these documents after you left him, Scarlett, which means either you're lying about when you disappeared, or someone's been forging your signature to commit federal fraud. Belinda Torino's words hung in the air like a death sentence as she spread the damning papers across Scarlett O'Brien's coffee table. Rain hammered against the windows of the modest Seattle apartment, but the storm outside was nothing compared to the hurricane brewing in Scarlett's chest. "That's impossible," Scarlett whispered, her hands shaking as she reached for the documents. "I haven't signed anything with his company since you fled in the middle of the night 3 years ago." "I know." Belinda's voice was grim. "But look at the dates. Look at your signature on these shell company formations. Scarlett, if this comes out, you could go to prison for financial crimes worth billions." The champagne flute Scarlett had been holding slipped from her fingers, shattering against the hardwood floor just as her 3-year-old twins came running from their playroom. "Mama!" James called out, his blue eyes so achingly familiar, so perfectly identical to his father's, wide with concern. "You okay?" Thomas toddled behind his brother, clutching a crayon drawing of stick figures that would have been adorable any other day. Today, it felt like a reminder of everything she'd sacrificed to protect them from the truth. Their father was a billionaire who'd destroyed lives for profit, and now he was trying to destroy hers. Hello, beautiful souls. I had to start with that bombshell because what I'm about to tell you is absolutely going to blow your mind. I hope you're somewhere comfortable because you're going to need to sit down for this one. Where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please hit that button now. This story has twists that will leave you speechless, and you won't want to miss a single moment. Scarlett knelt carefully around the broken glass, pulling her boys close while her mind raced through implications that could destroy everything she'd built. 3 years of hiding, of rebuilding, of creating a safe world for James and Thomas. All of it crumbling because Conrad Richards couldn't leave her alone even after she'd vanished from his life. "Belinda, how did you even find these?" The private investigator you hired to track your old corporate accounts finally got access to the sealed records. Belinda glanced meaningfully at the twins, then lowered her voice. "Honey, there's more. These aren't just random shell companies. They're all tied to the Meridian deal, the merger that's supposed to make Conrad the youngest tech billionaire in history." Scarlett's blood turned to ice. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that if this deal goes through using your forged signatures, you'll be legally responsible for securities fraud on a scale that makes Bernie Madoff look like a pickpocket." Belinda paused, studying her best friend's face. "But Scarlett, if you can prove the signatures were forged, his entire empire collapses?" Scarlett finished, the words tasting like vindication and terror all at once. Thunder crashed overhead, and James pressed closer to her side. She could smell his baby shampoo, could feel his trust in the way he melted against her, trust she'd earned by keeping him safe from a world of corporate backstabbing and billion-dollar betrayals. But safety was an illusion, wasn't it? It always had been. The cream-colored invitation lying on her coffee table seemed to pulse with malicious energy. Victoria Richards's elegant script mocking her from the expensive cardstock. "You are cordially invited to celebrate Conrad's 35th birthday." 3 years ago, that invitation would have been a weapon designed to humiliate her. Today, staring at evidence that her ex-husband had been systematically destroying her life from the shadows, it felt like something else entirely. It felt like opportunity. "The party," Scarlett said quietly. "It's in 3 days." Belinda's eyes widened. No. You can't seriously be thinking." "Victoria invited me to watch them parade his new fiancée around, to make me feel small and forgotten." Scarlett stood slowly, broken glass crunching under her feet. "But what if I showed up with something that could end him instead?" "With what? These documents?" "Honey, all you have is proof that someone's been forging your signature. You still can't prove it was him. Scarlett walked to the window, watching lightning illuminate the Seattle skyline while her boys chattered happily behind her, oblivious to the war being waged over their future. She thought about the second envelope that had arrived that morning, the one from Morrison and Associates, the most powerful law firm in the city. The one she hadn't had the courage to open yet. "Belinda," she said softly, "what would you say if I told you there might be a way to prove everything? To make sure James and Thomas never have to worry about their father's crimes catching up to them." "I'd say you're scaring me. And I'd ask what price you're thinking of paying for that proof." Scarlett turned back to her friend, and for the first time in 3 years, she felt the familiar burn of the woman she used to be, the corporate strategist who'd helped build an empire before she discovered the blood it was built on. "Maybe," she said quietly, "it's time Victoria Richards learned what happens when you invite a mother to watch you destroy her children's future." But what she didn't tell Belinda, what she couldn't tell anyone yet, was that the envelope from Morrison and Associates contained more than just legal advice. It contained an offer from someone who'd been watching Conrad Richards's rise to power with very different eyes. Someone who had their own reasons for wanting to see him fall. The phone rang, sharp and sudden in the quiet apartment. Scarlett glanced at the caller ID and felt her heart stop. Morrison and Associates. Her hand hovered over the phone as it rang again. James and Thomas looked up from their drawing, sensing the tension in the air with the intuition only children possessed. Answer it, and there would be no going back. Let it go to voicemail, and she could pretend this was still about forged signatures and birthday party revenge. But they'd already made it about so much more than that, hadn't they? The phone rang a third time. Scarlett picked it up. "Hello, Ms. O'Brien," came a smooth voice that made her skin crawl with recognition. "I believe we need to talk." Who's calling Scarlett with an offer that could change everything? And what's really in that second envelope? The next part is going to reveal connections that will shock you to your core. Make sure you're subscribed because you won't want to miss what happens when Scarlett learns the truth about who's really been pulling the strings. The voice on the other end of the line belonged to Patrick Ford, not the actor, but the most ruthless corporate attorney on the West Coast. A man who'd earned his reputation by burying scandals so deep they became geological formations. "Mr. Ford," Scarlett managed, her voice steadier than her hands. "I wasn't expecting your call." "I imagine not. But then again, I suspect there are quite a few things you haven't been expecting lately." His tone was silk wrapped around steel. "The forged documents, for instance. Or the fact that your ex-husband has been using your identity to legitimize what amounts to the largest securities fraud in tech history." Scarlett's knees gave out, and she sank onto her couch while Belinda watched with growing alarm. "How do you know about the documents?" "Ms. O'Brien, I've been investigating Conrad Richards for the better part of 2 years. My client has a very personal interest in seeing him brought to justice." "Who's your client?" A pause. Then, "Someone who'll be at the birthday party on Saturday night. Someone who's been waiting a very long time for the right moment to make his move." Ford's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "The question is, are you brave enough to be the catalyst that brings down an empire?" James tugged on her sleeve, holding up his drawing. "Mama, look, it's us at the park." She forced a smile, ruffling his dark hair while her world tilted on its axis. "It's beautiful, sweetheart. Why don't you and Thomas go pick a movie for tonight? Mama needs to finish this phone call." As the boys scampered off, chattering about superhero movies, Scarlett returned to the phone. "What exactly are you proposing?" "Dinner. Tonight. 7 o'clock. Chez Laurent downtown. Come alone, and I'll explain how we can ensure your children never have to worry about their father's crimes destroying their future." The line went dead. Belinda grabbed her arm. "Scar, please tell me you're not considering whatever insane thing that was." "You heard. I heard enough to know that Patrick Ford doesn't call random people to chat about the weather. Belinda's grip tightened. That man represents clients who make Conrad look like a choir boy. What could he possibly want with you? Scarlett stared at the invitation on her coffee table. Victoria Richards's elegant handwriting suddenly looking less like mockery and more like destiny. I think, she said slowly, I'm about to find out who's really been playing chess while the rest of us thought we were playing checkers. About 6 hours later, Chez Laurent was the kind of restaurant where conversations could topple governments and handshakes moved billions. Scarlett felt underdressed in her simple black dress and cardigan, a far cry from the designer gowns she used to wear when she'd been Mrs. Conrad Richards. Patrick Ford was already seated at a corner table, his silver hair and sharp suit commanding attention even in a room full of Seattle's elite. But it was the man sitting across from him that made Scarlett's steps falter. Tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of weathered handsomeness that spoke of a life lived fully rather than carefully. His dark eyes met hers across the restaurant, and something electric passed between them, recognition without introduction, understanding without words. This wasn't just another corporate shark. This was personal. Ms. O'Brien. Ford stood as she approached. Allow me to introduce my client, Matthew Vale. The name hit her like a physical blow. Matthew Vale, Conrad's former business partner, the man who'd been forced out of their company 7 years ago amid accusations of embezzlement. Accusations that had been proven false, but only after his reputation was destroyed and his engagement to his college sweetheart had ended in scandal. Matthew rose, extending his hand with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Scarlett, you're even more beautiful than I remembered. We've met. Once. Briefly. At a charity gala about 8 years ago. You were there with Conrad, wearing a velvet green dress that made every other woman in the room fade into the background. His voice carried a warmth that made her pulse quicken. You probably don't remember. It was right before everything went to hell for me. But she did remember. She remembered the way he'd looked at her that night. The way conversation had flowed like wine when Conrad had abandoned her to schmooze with potential investors. She remembered thinking that Matthew Vale was the kind of man who saw people rather than opportunities. And then, 3 weeks later, he'd been arrested for fraud. The charges were dropped, she said carefully. Eventually. But by then, the damage was done. My company was gone. My fiancé was gone. My reputation was in ashes. Matthew's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Amazing how quickly your life can disappear when someone with enough money and influence decides you're inconvenient. Ford cleared his throat. Perhaps we should sit. As they settled into the plush chairs, Scarlett tried to process the implications. You think Conrad framed you? I know Conrad framed me. Matthew's voice was quiet, controlled, but underneath she could hear 7 years of carefully banked rage. The same way I know he's been using your identity to commit fraud. The same way I know that the Meridian deal is built on a foundation of lies that goes back to the day he forced me out. A waiter appeared with wine, a vintage that probably cost more than Scarlett's monthly rent. But she barely noticed. What does this have to do with me? Ford leaned forward. Everything, Ms. O'Brien. Because you're not just Conrad's ex-wife. You're the co-founder of the algorithm that makes his entire tech empire possible. The world stopped. That's impossible. I never. The Meridian algorithm. The AI system that's supposed to revolutionize financial forecasting. Matthew's eyes never left her face. Tell me, Scarlett, do you remember the late nights you spent working on predictive modeling systems during the first year of your marriage? The programs you designed to help Conrad's company streamline their investment strategies. She did remember. Long nights at the kitchen table, surrounded by code printouts and coffee cups, explaining mathematical concepts while Conrad pretended to understand. She thought she was being a supportive wife, helping her husband's business grow. I was just helping with basic algorithms. Nothing groundbreaking. Nothing groundbreaking? Ford pulled out a tablet, showing her lines of code she recognized with a sickening jolt. Ms. O'Brien, this is the core architecture for the most valuable AI system in the world. Your signature is on the original patent applications. But I never signed any patent applications. No, Matthew said softly, but your husband did. In your name, without your knowledge or consent. He paused, letting that sink in. Scarlett, you're not just a victim of identity theft. You're the actual owner of the intellectual property that built Conrad's empire. The restaurant seemed to tilt around her. That's impossible. The marriage contract you signed included a clause about shared intellectual property rights, Ford explained. Standard boilerplate, but it means that any innovations created during your marriage belong to both spouses equally. When you left without filing for divorce or demanding a property settlement, those rights remained legally yours. Which means, Matthew continued, his voice gentle but implacable, that Conrad has been selling licenses to technology he doesn't actually own. The Meridian deal isn't just fraud, it's theft on a scale that could put him away for decades. Scarlett's mind raced through implications that made her dizzy. Why are you telling me this? What do you want? Matthew and Ford exchanged a look. Then Matthew reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers with devastating gentleness. I want justice, Scarlett. For both of us. For what he did to me 7 years ago, and for what he's been doing to you ever since. His thumb traced across her knuckles, and she felt something she hadn't experienced in years. The possibility of not being alone in this fight. But more than that. He paused, those dark eyes searching her face. I want to give you the choice to walk into that birthday party not as his discarded ex-wife, but as the woman who owns the very foundation his empire is built on. The twins' faces flashed in her mind, James with his gap-toothed grin, Thomas with his serious eyes that saw too much. Her beautiful boys who deserved a world where truth mattered more than money. And if I say yes? She whispered. Matthew's smile was sharp as broken glass. Then we make sure Conrad Richards learns what it feels like to lose everything that matters to him. But even as her pulse quickened at the thought of justice finally served, Scarlett couldn't ignore the way her heart raced when Matthew looked at her. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about the terrifying possibility that she might be falling for the one man who could either save her children's future or destroy what was left of her carefully rebuilt life. The choice was hers to make. In 2 days, Matthew Vale isn't just seeking revenge, he's offering Scarlett something much more dangerous. The truth about who she really is. But can she trust a man who has his own reasons for wanting to see Conrad fall? Part 3 is going to reveal the moment that changes everything. Don't forget to subscribe, so you don't miss what happens when the real game begins. Scarlett stared at the legal documents spread across her kitchen table like tarot cards predicting a future she'd never imagined. Matthew had insisted she take copies home, study them, understand exactly what they meant before making any decisions. But the numbers and legal jargon blurred together as her mind kept circling back to one impossible truth. She owned the technology that had made Conrad Richards a billionaire. Mama, why you look sad? Thomas climbed onto her lap, his small hands framing her face with the devastating honesty only children possessed. I'm not sad, baby. I'm just thinking. About the mean man? Scarlett's heart stopped. What mean man? The one in the pictures. James appeared beside his brother, pointing to her laptop screen where she'd been researching Matthew's claims. Conrad's face stared back at them from a recent tech magazine cover, all sharp suits and sharper smiles. He looks like us but mean. Out of the mouths of babes. Her phone buzzed with a text from Belinda. Please tell me you didn't agree to whatever insane plan those men proposed. Before she could respond, Another message appeared from an unknown number. The choice is yours, Scarlett. But know that Victoria has already made hers. Check your email. Matthew. How had he gotten her number? Her laptop chimed with a new email. Subject line. From your future mother-in-law. Against every instinct screaming at her to delete it, Scarlett clicked open. What she saw made her blood turn to ice. It was a photo from that morning's society pages. Conrad and his fiancée, Isabel Monroe, looking radiant outside Tiffany and Company. The headline read, Tech billionaire announces engagement to publishing heiress. But it was the caption that made Scarlett's hands shake. Conrad Richards finally found a woman worthy of the Richards legacy. Unlike his previous marriage to a nobody waitress who fled when she couldn't handle the pressure of high society. A nobody waitress. Scarlett had been a computational mathematics PhD, working on revolutionary algorithms when she'd met Conrad. She'd given up her own research career to support his dreams, pouring her expertise into his company while he took all the credit. And now Victoria was rewriting history, painting her as some gold digger who'd abandon ship when things got tough. But that wasn't the worst part. Scrolling down, she found Victoria's personal message. Dear Scarlett, I hope you'll understand why I felt it important for you to see how completely you've been forgotten. Conrad's wedding is planned for next month, and I want you to know that Isabel specifically requested your old engagement ring be reset for her. She said she wanted to erase any trace of his unfortunate past. I thought you should know before Saturday's party that your replacement has already claimed everything that was once yours. Try not to embarrass yourself. Victoria. The laptop screen cracked under the pressure of Scarlett's grip. Mama. Both boys were staring at her with wide eyes, sensing the shift in the air like small animals before a storm. It's okay, she whispered, but her voice was shaking. Mama just needs to make a phone call. She stepped onto the balcony, rain misting her face as she dialed Matthew's number with trembling fingers. Scarlett. His voice was warm, concerned. You saw the email. How did you? Because I've been watching Victoria Richards play this game for 7 years. She did the same thing to me. Public humiliation designed to make sure I never recovered from Conrad's betrayal. A pause. The difference is, you have something I never had. What's that? The power to hit back. Scarlett gripped the balcony railing, staring out at the Seattle skyline where somewhere, Conrad was probably celebrating his engagement while planning to steal her children's inheritance. Matthew, if I do this, if I walk into that party and expose him, there's no going back, is there? No, he said quietly. There isn't. But Scarlett, there's something else you need to know. Something I couldn't tell you at dinner. Her heart stopped. What? The reason I really want to bring Conrad down. It's not just about the money he stole or the reputation he destroyed. Matthew's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. It's about Sarah. Sarah, my fiancée, the one who left me when the scandal broke. Pain colored every word. She married Conrad 6 months after the charges were dropped. Not because she loved him, but because her family was drowning in debt and needed his money. The world tilted. Matthew, no. Isabel Monroe isn't Conrad's first replacement for you, Scarlett. Sarah was. And when she got pregnant with his child, his voice broke. She didn't survive the complications. Neither did the baby. Scarlett's knees gave out, and she sank into the patio chair as the full scope of Conrad's destruction became clear. This wasn't just about business fraud or stolen technology. This was about lives destroyed, love weaponized, and a man who collected people like trophies and discarded them when they stopped serving his purposes. I'm so sorry, she whispered. Don't be sorry. Be angry. Matthew's voice hardened. Because if we don't stop him now, Isabel will be next. And after her, someone else. And someone else after that. Through the glass doors, She could see James and Thomas building a fort out of couch cushions, their innocent laughter a stark contrast to the darkness surrounding their father's world. They deserved better than this legacy of lies and manipulation. They deserved the truth. "What do you need me to do?" she asked quietly. "Show up to that party. Bring the twins if you want. Let the world see what Conrad abandoned. And when the moment is right." Matthew paused. "Trust me to know when to strike. And after? When his empire comes crashing down." "After," Matthew said, his voice soft with promise, "we build something better. Together." The word together sent electricity through her chest. Dangerous, terrifying, and absolutely necessary. Because for the first time in 3 years, Scarlett wasn't facing this alone. "There's one more thing," she said, surprising herself with her boldness. "The twins, they're not just leverage, Matthew. They're his children. His actual children that he's never met." Silence stretched across the phone line. "Jesus," Matthew breathed. "Scarlett, does he know?" "No. I left before I could tell him. But when he sees them." She thought about those identical blue eyes, the stubborn jawline, the way James tilted his head exactly like Conrad when he was thinking. "There won't be any question. Which means he'll either try to take them from you, or he'll try to buy my silence to protect his perfect new life with Isabel." Scarlett's smile was sharp as winter. "Either way, we'll have him cornered." "You're sure about this?" "Once we walk into that party, everything changes." Scarlett looked through the glass at her beautiful boys, then at the cracked laptop screen still showing Conrad's engagement photos, at the lies about her being a nobody waitress, at the casual cruelty of erasing her existence from their shared history. "Matthew," she said quietly, "I just realized something." "What's that?" "I don't want his money. I don't want his apology. I don't even want him to suffer." Her voice grew stronger with each word. "I want him to understand what it feels like to lose everything you love because someone more powerful decided you didn't deserve it." And then, Scarlett thought about Matthew's eyes across that restaurant table, the way he'd looked at her like she was worthy of being seen, the way he'd offered her not just revenge, but partnership, choice, power. "And then," she said, "I want to find out what it feels like to build something real with someone who sees me as more than a trophy to be won or a problem to be solved." The silence that followed was charged with possibility. "Saturday night," Matthew said finally. 7 o'clock. "I'll pick you up." "Matthew." "Yeah. Don't let me lose my nerve." His laugh was warm and wicked. "Scarlett O'Brien, after what I've seen of your courage in the last 24 hours, I'm not worried about your nerve. I'm worried about whether Conrad Richards has any idea what's about to hit him." As she hung up, Scarlett realized that for the first time since she'd fled her marriage, she wasn't running away from her past. She was running toward her future, and it was going to be beautiful. The die was cast, and Scarlett had chosen her side. But walking into that party with Matthew and the twins wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about rewriting the rules of a game she never knew she was playing. And she was about to show everyone exactly how a mother's love becomes the most dangerous weapon of all. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of crystalline clarity that made Seattle look like a postcard. Scarlett stood before her bathroom mirror, applying lipstick with hands that refused to tremble despite the earthquake happening in her chest. The emerald green dress, a deliberate choice that would remind certain people of better times, hugged her curves in ways that motherhood had softened but not diminished. "Mama pretty," Thomas declared from the doorway, James nodding sagely beside him. Both boys wore miniature suits that Belinda had insisted on buying, their dark hair combed back to reveal those devastating blue eyes that would stop conversations the moment they walked into Victoria's carefully orchestrated humiliation party. "Thank you, sweetheart." She knelt to adjust James's tie, breathing in his innocent sweetness while her mind calculated angles and outcomes like the mathematician she'd once been. "Remember what Mama told you about tonight? Stay close. Be polite. Don't touch anything expensive," James recited dutifully. "And if anyone asks about Daddy," Thomas added, his 3-year-old wisdom cutting straight to the heart of things. "We tell the truth," Scarlett said firmly. "That Daddy doesn't live with us, but we're a happy family anyway." The doorbell rang, and her pulse spiked with anticipation that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with the man waiting on the other side. Matthew Vale stood in her hallway looking like he'd stepped out of a magazine spread on devastating handsomeness. The charcoal suit was perfectly tailored, his dark hair slightly tousled as if he'd been running his fingers through it, which he probably had, if he was half as nervous as she was. But it was the way he looked at her that made her forget how to breathe. Not like she was a weapon to be wielded or a problem to be solved, but like she was a woman worth fighting for. Scarlett. Her name was a prayer on his lips. "You look dangerous," she suggested, adjusting her earrings with more confidence than she felt. "Perfect." His gaze dropped to the twins peeking out from behind her legs. "And you must be James and Thomas." Matthew crouched to their level, his voice gentle. "I'm Matthew. I'm a friend of your mom's." "Are you gonna marry Mama?" Thomas asked with the devastating directness that made adults everywhere question their life choices. Matthew's eyes flicked to Scarlett, something unreadable passing between them. "That's up to your mom, buddy. But I promise I'm one of the good guys." James studied him with the serious expression that made him look heartbreakingly like Conrad. "Do you like dinosaurs?" "Love them." "What's your favorite?" "T-Rex. They have big teeth but tiny arms, so they can't hug anybody." Matthew's smile was genuine. "Well, that's why they need friends with longer arms to do the hugging for them." And just like that, her children, her careful, protected children who'd learned to be wary of strangers, were chattering away about prehistoric creatures while Matthew listened with the kind of attention most adults reserved for stock reports or sports scores. Maybe this is what partnership looks like, she thought, watching him engage with the most important people in her world. Maybe this is what I've been missing. The drive to Victoria's estate passed in a blur of nervous energy and careful planning. Matthew had outlined the evening strategy. Arrive fashionably late, let the shock of the twins' appearance do its work, and then wait for Conrad to make the first move. The legal documents were safely locked in Matthew's briefcase, insurance against whatever games Victoria thought she was playing. But as they pulled up to the Richards mansion, all glittering lights and valet parking and the kind of casual wealth that treated money like gravity, an inevitable force rather than something to be earned, Scarlett felt the familiar tightness in her chest that came with stepping back into a world that had never truly accepted her. "Second thoughts?" Matthew asked quietly, his hand finding hers across the leather seats. "Third and fourth thoughts," she admitted, "but not about the plan. About—" She gestured at the mansion, the arriving guests in their designer gowns and borrowed confidence. "I don't belong here anymore. Maybe I never did." "Good." His thumb traced across her knuckles. "Because the woman who belongs here would never have the courage to do what you're about to do." The valet opened her door, and suddenly they were committed. No turning back, no second chances, just the crystalline moment of choice that would define everything that came after. James grabbed her left hand, Thomas her right, while Matthew offered his arm with old-world courtesy that made her feel like royalty instead of an interloper. They walked up the marble steps together, a family that shouldn't exist confronting a past that refused to stay buried. The massive front doors opened to reveal Victoria Richards in all her glacial magnificence. Silver hair swept into a perfect chignon, diamonds catching the light like tiny weapons. Her welcoming smile faltered for exactly one heartbeat when she saw the twins, then snapped back into place with the precision of someone who'd spent decades perfecting the art of social warfare. "Scarlett, how Unexpected. Victoria's gaze swept over Matthew with barely concealed calculation. And you've brought guests. Matthew Vale. He extended his hand with a smile that could have cut glass. Thank you for having us, Mrs. Richards. Though I suspect you remember me. Victoria's face went pale beneath her makeup. Whatever game she'd thought she was playing, Matthew's presence had just changed all the rules. Of course. How lovely to see you again. The words came out like she was chewing broken glass. And these must be James and Thomas, Scarlett said smoothly. My sons. The silence stretched like a taut wire, every guest in the immediate vicinity falling quiet as they processed the implications. Two little boys with unmistakable Richards features standing in the Richards foyer like living proof of secrets Victoria had thought buried forever. Well, Victoria said finally, her voice bright with the kind of desperation that came from losing control of your own narrative. How wonderful. Please, come in. Conrad will be so surprised. They moved through the crowd like a storm front, conversations dying in their wake as people recognized faces they'd thought they'd never see again. Scarlett could feel the weight of stares, the whispered speculation, the social media posts being composed in real time. But instead of the old familiar shame, she felt something else entirely. Power. Because she wasn't the broken woman who'd fled in the night 3 years ago. She was a mother protecting her children, a mathematician who understood how to calculate the exact pressure needed to bring down an empire, and a woman who'd finally found someone willing to stand beside her instead of in front of her. There he is, Matthew murmured, his hands settling protectively on the small of her back. Across the ballroom, Conrad Richards held court near the champagne fountain, resplendent in a tuxedo that probably cost more than most people's cars. His arm was wrapped around Isabel Monroe, a blonde vision in white who laughed at his jokes with the practiced timing of someone who understood that marriage was a business transaction disguised as romance. He looked successful, untouchable, exactly like the man who'd convinced her that love meant sacrificing yourself on the altar of someone else's ambitions. But then James tugged on her dress. Mama, why is everyone staring? And suddenly, Conrad's head turned toward them like he'd been struck by lightning. The champagne glass slipped from his fingers, shattering against the floor in a cascade of crystal and golden wine. His face went white, then red, then white again as his gaze moved from Scarlett to Matthew to the twins who looked like miniature versions of himself. Isabel followed his stare, her perfect smile freezing into something resembling rigor mortis as she processed what everyone else in the room was already understanding. Conrad Richards, tech billionaire and soon-to-be married man, was staring at the children he'd never known existed with the expression of someone watching his carefully constructed world begin its inevitable collapse. The orchestra continued playing, but every conversation had stopped. Camera phones appeared like flowers blooming in fast-forward, capturing the moment that would be dissected in gossip columns and boardrooms for years to come. Matthew leaned close to Scarlett's ear, his breath warm against her neck. Are you ready? She looked at her beautiful boys, then at the man who'd given them life but never bothered to know them, then at the woman beside him who'd already planned to erase any trace of Scarlett's existence. Actually, she said quietly, I think I've been ready for this my entire life. Because sometimes the most revolutionary act isn't running away from the past. Sometimes it's walking directly into it and refusing to apologize for taking up space in a world that tried to forget you existed. The real game was just beginning. The ballroom had transformed into a theater of whispers and barely contained chaos. Guests clustered in small groups, their champagne forgotten as they watched the drama unfolding near the orchestra pit. Scarlett could feel the weight of 100 conversations happening behind fans and cupped hands, speculation spreading like wildfire through Seattle's elite. Are those really his children? She's been gone for 3 years. Matthew Vale? Wasn't he arrested? Look at those eyes. There's no question. Conrad hadn't moved from his position by the champagne fountain, Isabel clinging to his arm like a life preserver while he stared at James and Thomas with the expression of a man watching his DNA waltz around the room in miniature tuxedos. "Conrad, darling?" Isabel's voice carried the kind of forced brightness that suggested panic lurking beneath her society training. "Who are these people?" Before he could answer, Victoria materialized beside them with the swift efficiency of someone executing damage control. "Isabel, dear, why don't we get you some air? The terrace is lovely this time of evening." But Isabel wasn't moving. Her gaze was fixed on the twins with the calculating precision of someone who understood exactly what their existence meant for her carefully planned future. "Those children look remarkably like you, Conrad. Don't be ridiculous." Victoria's laugh sounded like breaking glass. "The resemblance is purely coincidental." Scarlett was always prone to dramatic gestures. That's when Matthew stepped forward, his voice carrying the kind of courtroom authority that sliced through social pleasantries like a blade through silk. "Actually, Mrs. Richards, I think we're past the point of coincidences." He reached into his jacket and withdrew a manila envelope, the same legal documents that had shattered Scarlett's world 3 days ago. But as he held it up for the room to see, she realized this wasn't about the forged signatures or the stolen technology. This was about something far more devastating. "You see," Matthew continued, his voice pitched perfectly to carry across the ballroom without seeming like he was performing. "When you've spent 2 years investigating someone's business practices, you tend to uncover all sorts of interesting information." Conrad found his voice at last. "Matthew, I should have known you'd crawl out of whatever hole you've been hiding in." "Oh, I haven't been hiding." Matthew's smile was sharp as winter. "I've been building a case. Would you like to know what I found?" The orchestra had stopped playing. Even the waitstaff had frozen in place, sensing that whatever was about to happen would be the kind of story that got told and retold until it became legend. Scarlett felt James slip his hand into hers, his small fingers warm and trusting. Across the room, Conrad's gaze finally met hers for the first time in 3 years, and she saw something she'd never expected. Fear. Not of scandal or financial ruin, but of the children he was looking at with growing recognition and wonder. "Matthew," she said quietly, "maybe we should." "No." His voice was gentle but implacable. "He needs to hear this. They all do." He turned back to Conrad, holding up the envelope like evidence in a trial. "Did you really think you could use your ex-wife's identity to commit securities fraud without anyone noticing?" Gasps rippled through the crowd. Isabel's grip on Conrad's arm tightened. "What is he talking about?" "The Meridian algorithm," Matthew announced to the room. "The artificial intelligence system that's made Conrad Richards the most sought-after tech investor in the country. The foundation of his entire empire." He paused for effect. "Was created by Scarlett O'Brien." The silence that followed was deafening. "That's impossible," Conrad said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Scarlett was never involved in the intellectual property development, the patent applications, the licensing agreements." Matthew pulled papers from the envelope, holding them up like playing cards. "Because I have documentation that says otherwise. Her signature, her algorithms, her mathematical models that you've been selling to Fortune 500 companies for 7 years. Scarlett watched the blood drain from Conrad's face as the full scope of his exposure became clear. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about the fundamental theft of identity, of credit, of the very work that had built his reputation. But Matthew wasn't finished. "Of course, that's just the beginning," he continued, his voice dropping to the kind of conversational tone that made everyone lean closer. "Because when you start digging into someone's business practices, you find patterns. Like the way certain competitors mysteriously lose major contracts right before Conrad swoops in with better offers. You're talking about standard business practices, Conrad said, but sweat was beginning to show at his temples. I'm talking about industrial espionage, corporate sabotage, the systematic destruction of anyone who stands in your way. Matthew's gaze swept the room, ensuring everyone was listening. Ask Marcus Williams how standard it felt when his servers were hacked 3 days before his IPO. Ask David Preston why his biggest investor suddenly pulled out after receiving anonymous information about irregularities that turned out to be completely fabricated. More gasps. More whispers. The carefully curated world of Seattle's tech elite was beginning to crack along fault lines they'd never known existed. Thomas tugged on Scarlett's dress. "Mama, why is everyone so upset?" Before she could answer, Conrad broke away from Isabel and started walking toward them. The crowd parted like water, sensing the electric charge of a confrontation that had been brewing for 3 years. He stopped just a few feet away, close enough that she could see the way his hands were shaking, close enough that the twins could study the face that looked so much like their own. Scarlett. Her name came out like a prayer and a curse all at once. Are they what, Conrad? Her voice was steadier than her heartbeat. Are they your sons? Are they the children you never knew existed because you were too busy destroying lives to notice when your wife needed to tell you something important? The twins looked up at him with curious innocence, seeing only a stranger who looked familiar. James tilted his head in that devastating way that was pure Conrad, while Thomas stepped slightly behind Scarlett's legs, sensing tension without understanding its source. How old are they? Conrad whispered. 3. The number hung in the air like an accusation. I found out I was pregnant the same week I discovered what you'd done to Matthew. What you'd done to all those people whose only crime was standing in your way. Isabel appeared at Conrad's shoulder, her face pale but determined. This is absurd. Even if those children are his, it doesn't change anything. We're getting married next month. That's when Matthew played his final card. About that, he said, pulling another document from the envelope. Isabel, did you know that your fiancé is still legally married? The world stopped. What? Isabel's voice cracked like a whip. Scarlett never filed for divorce. Matthew explained with the patience of someone explaining simple mathematics to children. She simply left, which means that every business contract Conrad has signed as a single man, every financial agreement, even the prenuptial arrangement with you, is based on fraud. Scarlett felt the ground shift beneath her feet. She'd assumed, she'd thought, but in her desperate flight 3 years ago, she'd never bothered with legal proceedings. She'd just run, which meant she was still Mrs. Conrad Richards, which meant Isabel was about to marry a man who was already legally bound to someone else, which meant the Meridian deal, worth billions and scheduled to close next week, was being negotiated by a man who'd misrepresented his legal status on every single document. Jesus Christ, Conrad breathed, the full scope of his vulnerability finally hitting him. But Scarlett was looking at Matthew with dawning realization. You knew. When you called me, when you invited me to dinner, you already knew about the marriage. His smile was soft, apologetic, and absolutely unrepentant. I knew. Just like I knew that walking in here tonight with those children and the truth about your algorithms would give you the power to destroy him completely. He paused. The question is, what are you going to do with that power? The ballroom had fallen silent except for the whisper of expensive fabric and the soft clink of jewelry as 100 of Seattle's most influential people waited to see how this particular Greek tragedy would resolve itself. Thomas looked up at Scarlett with those impossibly blue eyes. Mama, can we go home now? I don't like this party. And suddenly, looking at her beautiful son who just wanted to feel safe, Scarlett understood that revenge was a luxury she couldn't afford, because she wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for the kind of world she wanted her children to inherit, which meant the real game was just beginning. The silence stretched like a taut wire until Victoria Richards stepped forward, her voice cutting through the tension with the authority of someone who'd spent decades managing crises. "This is quite enough." Her words rang across the ballroom with imperial command. "Whatever complications have arisen this evening, they can certainly be discussed privately. Guests, please continue enjoying the celebration." But the damage was done. Phones were already out, recording everything. Tomorrow's headlines were writing themselves in real time. Tech billionaire's secret marriage scandal and hidden twins rock Seattle elite and Meridian deal in jeopardy after fraud allegations. Conrad moved toward Scarlett and the twins, his face a mask of desperate calculation. "We need to talk. Now." "I don't think," Matthew started, but Scarlett touched his arm. "It's okay." She looked down at James and Thomas, who were beginning to sense the adult tension crackling around them. "Boys, why don't you go with Mathuto get some juice? I need to speak with this gentleman for a moment." "But Mama," James's voice carried the uncertainty of a child who understood that grown-up conversations sometimes changed everything. "I'll be right there, sweetheart. I promise." Matthew crouched down to their level. "Come on, guys. I bet they have chocolate cake somewhere in this fancy place." As he led the twins away, Scarlett felt something cold settle in her chest. She was alone with Conrad for the first time in 3 years, and nothing about it felt like closure. "Scarlett." He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne, the same expensive scent that used to make her pulse race, now just a reminder of everything she'd lost. "God, you look exactly the same." "I'm not the same." Her voice was steady, controlled. "I'm not the woman who believed your lies about loving me. I did love you." The words came out raw, desperate. "I do love you. Everything I built, everything I achieved, it was supposed to be for us. For our future. Our future." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Conrad, you stole my work and sold it as your own. You used my identity to commit fraud. You destroyed people's lives and convinced me it was just business." She gestured toward where Isabel stood frozen by the champagne fountain. "And then you replaced me with someone whose family connections could advance your career. That's not. Isabel is." He ran his hands through his hair, destroying his perfect styling. "This is a mess. But we can fix it. We can fix everything." "How?" The question came out sharper than she'd intended. "How do you fix 3 years of lies? How do you fix the fact that your sons don't know who you are because you never bothered to find out they existed?" Conrad's gaze followed hers to where Matthew was crouched beside James and Thomas near the dessert table, both boys giggling at something he'd said. The sight seemed to physically pain him. "I didn't know," he whispered. "Scarlett, if I'd known you were pregnant, you would have what? Stopped destroying innocent people? Stopped stealing credit for work you didn't do?" She shook her head. "Or would you have just found a way to control me like you controlled everything else?" Before he could answer, Isabel appeared at his side, her face pale but determined. "Conrad, we need to leave. Now. Before this gets any worse." "Isabel, just give me a minute." "A minute?" Her voice cracked with hysteria. "Your wife just showed up with your children and exposed you as a fraud in front of half of Seattle. There is no minute. There's only damage control." Scarlett watched the exchange with growing clarity. This wasn't love she was witnessing. This was panic management. 2 people more concerned with protecting their image than with truth or justice or the children whose existence had just appended their carefully planned future. "The Meridian deal," Isabel continued, her voice dropping to an urgent whisper. "If the board finds out about the marriage fraud, the patent theft, Conrad, they'll not only cancel the merger, they'll sue us into bankruptcy." "I know," he said, and Scarlett could see the exact moment he shifted from regretful ex-husband to calculating businessman. "We need to contain this. That's when Matthew reappeared with the twins, both boys happily clutching chocolate cake pops and looking significantly less stressed than the adults around them. "Everything okay?" Matthew asked, though his sharp gaze suggested he'd already assessed the situation. "Actually," Conrad said, straightening his jacket and slipping back into his boardroom persona, "I think we should all sit down tomorrow and discuss this rationally. Like adults." "Discuss what?" Scarlett asked, though she had a sinking feeling she already knew. "A settlement. Something that works for everyone." His smile was practiced, the same one that had charmed investors and journalists for years. "The twins deserve financial security. You deserve compensation for your contributions to the company. And I think we can all agree that a protracted legal battle would benefit no one." Scarlett felt Matthew tense beside her. "What kind of settlement?" "Generous," Conrad said quickly. "Very generous. Enough to ensure the boys' education, your comfort, a fresh start wherever you want." He paused. "In exchange for a quiet divorce, a non-disclosure agreement, and your agreement not to pursue any claims regarding the patents." The audacity took her breath away. After everything, the fraud, the theft, the years of silence, he thought he could simply write a check and make it all disappear. "And if I refuse?" Conrad's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold and predatory underneath. "Then we'll be forced to contest paternity, demand DNA tests, drag this through family court for years while investigators look into your life, your finances, your fitness as a mother." His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "It would be expensive, time-consuming, and children sometimes get lost in the shuffle of lengthy custody battles." The threat hit her like a physical blow. Not just the money or the public humiliation, but the possibility of losing James and Thomas to a legal system that favored wealth over justice. Matthew stepped forward, his voice deadly quiet. "Are you threatening to take her children?" "I'm offering to provide for them," Conrad corrected. "To be the father they deserve. But that requires cooperation from all parties." "Mama!" Thomas appeared at her side, chocolate smeared on his cheek and concern in those blue eyes that looked so much like his father's. "Are you sad again?" Scarlett knelt down, pulling both boys close while her mind raced through possibilities that all seemed to end in loss. Take the money and sign away her rights to the work that had built an empire? Refuse and risk losing her children in a custody battle she couldn't afford to fight? "I need time to think," she said finally. "Of course." Conrad's smile was understanding, magnanimous. "Take all the time you need. My lawyers will have papers drawn up by Monday. Something that protects everyone's interests." As he walked away with Isabel, their heads bent together in urgent conversation. Scarlett felt the walls closing in around her. She'd walked into this party thinking she held all the cards, only to discover that Conrad had been playing a different game entirely. Matthew's hand found hers, warm and steady. "We'll fight this. Whatever he's planning, we'll." "With what?" The words came out more bitter than she'd intended. "Matthew, he's a billionaire with unlimited legal resources. I'm a single mother with a savings account and years of running from problems." She looked down at the twins, who were starting to pick up on the adult tension despite their sugar-induced cheerfulness. "Maybe he's right. Maybe a settlement is better for everyone." "Scarlett, no." Matthew's voice carried an urgency that made her look up. "You don't understand. If you sign those papers, if you let him bury this scandal with money, then Sarah died for nothing. All those people whose lives he destroyed, their suffering becomes meaningless." "I can't sacrifice my children for justice," she whispered. "I won't. And he knows that," Matthew said quietly. "That's what makes him so dangerous. He'll use your love for them as a weapon until you give him everything he wants." Around them, the party continued with forced normalcy, but Scarlett could feel the weight of stares and whispered conversations. By tomorrow, Her children's faces would be splashed across tabloids and social media. Their peaceful, protected life in Seattle would be over regardless of what legal papers she signed. James tugged on her dress. "Mama, can we go home now? This place feels scary." Looking at her son's worried face, Scarlett realized that Matthew was right about one thing. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about the kind of world she wanted her children to grow up in, one where truth mattered, or one where money could buy any lie you needed to tell. The choice was hers to make, and she was running out of time to make it. The drive back to Scarlett's apartment passed in tense silence, the twins finally asleep in their car seats while the city lights blurred past the windows like fallen stars. Matthew's hands gripped the steering wheel with white-knuckled intensity, and Scarlett could feel the weight of unspoken words filling the space between them. "You're thinking of taking his offer?" Matthew said finally, his voice carefully neutral. "I'm thinking of protecting my children." Scarlett stared out at the familiar streets of her neighborhood, modest houses with small yards, working families who didn't measure success in billions or headlines. "Maybe that makes me a coward, but I can't risk losing them." Matthew pulled into her parking space and turned off the engine, but neither of them moved to get out. The twins' soft breathing was the only sound in the sudden quiet. "3 days ago, I thought I knew what I wanted," he said quietly. "Justice for Sarah. Revenge for what Conrad did to my life. Watching him lose everything the way I did." He turned to look at her, and in the dim light she could see something shifting in his expression. "But tonight, watching him threaten your children, I realized I want something else more." "What's that?" "I want you to win. Not just against him, but completely. I want you to have everything your children, your credit for the work you did, the life you deserve." His hand found hers across the console. "And I want to be part of that life, if you'll let me." The confession hit her like a physical blow, not because it was unwelcome, but because it was everything she'd been afraid to hope for. "Matthew, I know the timing is terrible. I know we barely know each other. But what I felt tonight, watching him try to take away the people you love." He shook his head. "I've never wanted to protect someone the way I want to protect you and those boys." Scarlett looked back at James and Thomas, their faces peaceful in sleep, and felt something crystallize in her chest. Not resignation, but clarity. "He's counting on me being afraid," she said softly. "He's counting on me choosing the safe path because that's what I've always done. Run when things get difficult. Hide when the stakes get too high. You're not running now." "No." She turned back to Matthew, and for the first time since the party, she smiled. "I'm done running, but I need to know something first. Anything. When this is over, when we expose him, when his empire comes crashing down, will you still want this? Will you still want us?" She gestured toward the twins. "Because they come with me, Matthew. Always. And they need stability, not someone who's going to disappear when the excitement wears off." His answer came without hesitation. "Scarlett, I've spent 7 years building a life around absence. The absence of justice, of love, of family. Watching you with your children tonight, I've never seen anything more beautiful than the way you love them. If you'll have me, I want to spend the rest of my life trying to earn that kind of devotion from all 3 of you." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with promise and possibility. "Okay," she said finally. "Then let's do this right." Sunday morning, Belinda arrived with coffee and croissants to find Scarlett and Matthew at the Kit Williams table, legal documents spread between them like battle plans while the twins built elaborate Lego cities on the living room floor. "Please tell me you didn't spend the night planning something catastrophically stupid," Belinda said, settling into a chair with the weary resignation of someone who'd been managing Scarlett's crises for years. "Actually," Matthew said, looking up from his laptop, "we spent the night planning something brilliant." He turned the screen toward Belinda, showing a meticulously organized presentation that made her eyes widen. Patent applications with Scarlett's original signatures. Financial records showing the systematic theft of her intellectual property. Corporate communications detailing Conrad's pattern of destroying competitors. But that wasn't the devastating part. Jesus, Belinda breathed, scrolling through the evidence. Is this everything? Scarlett confirmed. Not just the algorithm theft, but years of corporate espionage, industrial sabotage, and fraud. Matthew's been building this case for 7 years, but he needed someone with inside knowledge to connect all the pieces. Someone who helped create the original technology, Matthew added. Someone who could prove that Conrad's entire empire is built on stolen intellectual property. Belinda looked between them, understanding dawning on her face. You're not just going to expose him. You're going to destroy him completely. We're going to let him destroy himself, Scarlett corrected. The Meridian deal closes Wednesday. When the board discovers that their star technology is legally owned by someone else, that their CEO has been committing fraud for years, that their marriage-based investor agreements are invalid, she shrugged. The collapse will be spectacular. And the custody threat? Matthew's smile was sharp as winter. Hard to fight for custody when you're facing federal charges for securities fraud. Even harder when the children's mother owns the intellectual property that built your fortune. James wandered over from his Lego construction, climbing into Scarlett's lap with the casual confidence of a child who knew he was loved. Mama, is the mean man gonna leave us alone now? Yes, sweetheart, she said, pressing a kiss to his dark hair. I think he is. But even as she spoke the words, Scarlett's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Final offer. 20 million. Take it or face the consequences. You have until Monday morning. See. She showed the message to Matthew, watching his expression harden. He's scared, Matthew said quietly. Really scared. 20 million is desperation money. Or, Belinda pointed out, it's enough to disappear. Start over somewhere he can't find you. Scarlett looked around the small apartment, at the twins' artwork on the refrigerator, at the life she'd built from nothing, at Matthew hunched over legal documents like a man preparing for war. 20 million would solve every financial problem she'd ever have. It would give James and Thomas every opportunity money could buy. But it would also teach them that some people were above justice simply because they had enough money to buy their way out of consequences. You know what the difference is between Conrad and me? She said finally. What? He thinks money is power, but money is just a tool. She stood, settling James back on his feet before walking to the window where Seattle spread out below them in all its imperfect, honest glory. Real power is knowing that some things can't be bought. Like truth. Like justice. Like the kind of love that makes you willing to fight for people who can't fight for themselves. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was Patrick Ford. Ms. O'Brien, I trust you've considered our offer carefully. My client is prepared to be very generous in exchange for your cooperation. However, I should mention that refusing our terms would be inadvisable. There are aspects of your situation that could become quite complicated if this matter proceeds to litigation. Matthew read the message over her shoulder, his jaw tightening. They're threatening you. They're threatening all of us, Scarlett corrected. She thought about Sarah, about Matthew's destroyed reputation, about all the people whose lives had been casualties in Conrad's rise to power. But here's what they don't understand. She picked up her phone and typed back, Mr. Ford, please inform your client that his final offer has been rejected. See you in court. Scarlett O'Brien, rightful owner of the Meridian algorithm. The message sent with a soft chime that sounded like destiny arriving right on schedule. Scarlett, Belinda said carefully, you realize what you're starting here? This isn't just about winning or losing anymore. This is about surviving what comes next. I know. Scarlett looked at Matthew, at the twins playing happily in the morning light, at the evidence spread across her kitchen table that could bring down an empire. But for the first time in my life, I'm not fighting alone. Matthew stood, moving to her side with the kind of certainty that made her believe anything was possible. Then let's go to war. Outside, storm clouds were gathering over the Seattle skyline, but inside the small apartment, 3 adults and 2 children were planning the kind of victory that would rewrite the rules for everyone who came after. The real battle was about to begin. On Monday morning at Morrison and Associates law offices, the conference room on the 42nd floor of downtown Seattle's most prestigious legal tower felt like a gladiator arena dressed in mahogany and leather. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Elliott Bay, but nobody was admiring the scenery. Conrad sat at one end of the polished table, flanked by 3 attorneys who looked like they charged by the breath. Isabel perched beside him, her usual composure cracked around the edges like expensive porcelain under pressure. Victoria Richards occupied the chair at his right hand, her silver hair pulled back so severely it could have been used as a weapon. At the opposite end, Scarlett sat with Matthew and a legal team that Patrick Ford had clearly not expected. The documents between them weren't just evidence anymore. They were ammunition. Let's get straight to the point, Ford said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to intimidating people into submission. My client is prepared to offer $30 million for a complete settlement. Ms. O'Brien retains custody, receives generous child support, and signs a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement. Generous? Matthew murmured, not looking up from his tablet. That's one way to describe hush money. Mr. Vale, Ford's tone could have frozen helium. Perhaps you should consider whether inserting yourself into this matter is wise, given your own legal vulnerabilities. What legal vulnerabilities? Scarlett's attorney, Catherine Mills, was a woman who looked like she'd been carved from granite and trained by wolves. Are you referring to the charges that were completely dismissed? Or are you threatening to fabricate new ones? The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Conrad leaned forward, his mask of corporate charm slipping to reveal something desperate underneath. Scarlett, please. Be reasonable. This benefits everyone. The boys get security, you get independence, and we all avoid a messy public battle that helps no one. Except, Scarlett said quietly, it helps you avoid federal charges for securities fraud. That's a very serious accusation, Victoria interjected, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. I hope you have proof to back up such inflammatory claims. Matthew smiled and slid a thick folder across the table. Actually, we do. What happened next was like watching a controlled demolition in slow motion. Page by page, document by document, the careful architecture of Conrad's empire revealed itself to be built on a foundation of lies. Forged signatures dating back 7 years. Patent applications filed under Scarlett's name without her knowledge. Licensing agreements worth hundreds of millions based on technology she had created during their marriage. Shell companies using her credentials to legitimize fraud on an international scale. But the devastating blow came from an unexpected source. There's one more thing, Matthew said, pulling out his phone. Scarlett, would you mind calling your old research partner from graduate school? Dr. Amanda Williams from MIT. Scarlett's eyes widened, but she made the call. The phone speaker crackled to life with a voice that carried the authority of academic precision. Scarlett, I was hoping you'd call after I saw the news. Listen, I need to tell you something about those algorithm patents. What about them, Amanda? I've been tracking citations for our old work, and your Meridian algorithm has been referenced in over 300 academic papers. But here's the thing, none of them cite you as the creator. They all credit someone named C. Richards. A pause. Honey, that's your work. The mathematical foundations, the predictive modeling, even the error correction protocols. I helped you develop those systems 8 years ago. Ford's face had gone pale. This conversation is being recorded without consent. Actually, Catherine Mills said smoothly, Dr. Williams is calling from Massachusetts, where single-party consent applies. Please continue, Doctor. The worst part is, I've been trying to reach you for months because the European Patent Office flagged irregularities in the applications. Someone's been filing international patents using your research without proper attribution. If this gets reported to the Academic Fraud Committee, Conrad's hand shot out to disconnect the call, but Matthew was faster. Thank you, Dr. Williams. We'll be in touch. The silence that followed was deafening. Isabel was staring at Conrad like she'd never seen him before. You stole her work. All of it. Everything we're supposed to build our life on is stolen. Isabel, that's not. Don't. Her voice cracked like a whip. Don't you dare lie to me now. Not when I'm sitting here listening to proof that our entire engagement is based on fraud. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. The wedding is off. The merger is off. And if anyone asks why, I'll tell them exactly what I heard in this room. She walked out without looking back, leaving Conrad staring after her with the expression of a man watching his carefully constructed future disintegrate in real time. Victoria tried to salvage the situation. This is all very convenient, but academic collaboration doesn't negate. Mrs. Richards, Catherine Mills interrupted. Your son has been committing felony fraud for 7 years. The statute of limitations hasn't expired. The evidence is overwhelming, and as of this morning, the FBI has been notified. You're bluffing. Matthew's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and smiled. Actually, we're not. That was Agent Sarah Torres from the Financial Crimes Division. They're very interested in discussing the Meridian deal with your son. Conrad's facade finally cracked completely. You can't do this. Those children are my sons. I have rights. You have the right to remain silent, Scarlett said quietly, standing for the first time since the meeting began, which is something you should have considered before threatening to take my children away from me. She walked around the table, coming to stand directly in front of the man who had once convinced her that love meant sacrificing everything for someone else's dreams. You want to know the difference between us, Conrad? I built that algorithm to help people, to create systems that could predict market crashes and prevent financial disasters. You turned it into a weapon to destroy your competitors and line your own pockets. Scarlett, please. I'm not finished. Her voice carried a strength that surprised even her. For 3 years, I let you control the narrative. I let you erase me from our shared history and pretend I never mattered. But I won't let you teach my sons that power comes from destroying other people. She pulled out a document that made Ford's eyes widen with recognition. This is a custody agreement, she announced. It grants you supervised visitation with James and Thomas, provided you submit to regular drug and alcohol testing, complete anger management counseling, and make full financial disclosure of all assets. And if I refuse, then you get nothing. Her smile was sharp as vindication. No visitation, no relationship with your children, and no claim to any intellectual property you've been stealing for the better part of a decade. Conrad stared at the document like it was a death sentence. This is extortion. This is justice? Matthew corrected, moving to stand beside Scarlett. Though I suppose they might look similar from your perspective. Ford cleared his throat, recognizing defeat when it was staring him in the face. My client will need time to review. Your client has until 5 o'clock today, Catherine Mills said firmly. After that, the FBI gets everything we have, the patent violations get reported to international authorities, and the custody arrangement becomes significantly less generous. As they filed out of the conference room, Scarlett felt something she hadn't experienced in years. The absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged, fighting for exactly the right things, with exactly the right person beside her. The war was over, and for the first time in her life, she had won completely. But the most important victory was still waiting for her at home, in the form of two little boys who were about to learn that sometimes, when you stand up for what's right, the world rearranges itself around your courage. Justice, as it turned out, was the most beautiful revolution of all. 6 months later, on Christmas morning, snow was falling outside the windows of Matthew's house, their house now. Scarlett corrected herself with a smile that still felt new, dusting the evergreen trees in the yard where James and Thomas were building what they insisted was a dinosaur, but looked suspiciously like a snowman with stick arms. "Mama, look!" James called through the glass door, his cheeks red with cold and excitement. "We made a T-Rex." "I see that, sweetheart," she called back, wrapping her hands around a mug of coffee that Matthew had brought her without being asked. 6 months of mornings together, and he still remembered that she liked exactly 2 sugars and a splash of cream. "They're going to be frozen solid by the time they come in," Matthew observed, settling beside her on the couch with his own mug and the newspaper. The Seattle Times lay folded to an article that still made her shake her head in amazement. Former tech CEO sentenced to 8 years for securities fraud. Conrad's empire had collapsed even faster than they'd predicted. The Meridian deal hadn't just been canceled. It had triggered investigations into his entire business history that uncovered fraud spanning nearly a decade. Companies across 3 continents were filing lawsuits. Former employees were coming forward with stories of intimidation and corporate espionage. The man who'd once graced magazine covers as Seattle's golden boy was now serving time in federal prison. "Any regrets?" Matthew asked quietly, though she could tell from his tone that he already knew the answer. "About bringing him down? Never." She leaned into his shoulder, breathing in the scent of pine and coffee and the particular warmth that meant home. "About the custody arrangement? Sometimes." It was true. Conrad had eventually signed the supervised visitation agreement, but he'd only used it twice. Both visits had been stilted. Awkward affairs where he tried to impress James and Thomas with expensive toys while clearly having no idea how to actually talk to them. After the second visit, he'd simply stopped showing up. "He doesn't know what he's missing," Matthew said, and she could hear the genuine sadness in his voice. Not for Conrad, but for the children who'd been abandoned by a father too selfish to learn how to love them. "Maybe that's for the best," Scarlett replied. "They have you now." The adoption papers had been finalized last week. James and Thomas O'Brien Vale, with a father who showed up to every soccer practice and bedtime story, who knew that Thomas liked his sandwiches cut diagonally and James needed exactly 3 books read aloud before he could fall asleep. "Besides," she added, watching her boys through the window as they attempted to give their snow dinosaur a tail made of pine branches, "I think we're doing just fine on our own." Her phone buzzed with a text from Elena. "Saw the news about the patent settlement. Holy shit, Scar. You're officially a millionaire. How does it feel to own technology that's going to revolutionize financial forecasting?" The patent settlement had been almost anticlimactic after everything else. 7 years of stolen licensing fees, plus damages, plus the rights to future development of the Meridian algorithm. Enough money to ensure that James and Thomas would never want for anything, and enough left over to fund the research foundation that Scarlett was launching in partnership with MIT. The Ethical Technology Initiative would focus on ensuring that AI development prioritized human welfare over profit margins. It was the kind of work she'd always wanted to do, before she'd gotten sidetracked by love and marriage and the belief that supporting someone else's dreams was more important than pursuing her own. "There's something else," Matthew said, setting down his coffee with the careful precision of someone who was either very nervous or very excited. Something I wanted to give you before the boys come in." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box that made her heart stop completely. "Matthew, before you say anything," he said quickly, "I know we said we'd take things slow. I know it's only been 6 months since everything happened. But Scarlett, I've spent the last 7 years of my life waiting for something to change, waiting for justice, waiting for a reason to believe in the future again." He opened the box to reveal a ring that was nothing like the ostentatious diamond Conrad had given her years ago. This was elegant, simple, beautiful, a sapphire surrounded by smaller diamonds that caught the morning light like promises. "I don't want to wait anymore. I want to build a life with you and the boys. I want to wake up every morning knowing that we're choosing each other, every single day." Scarlett stared at the ring, her mind cycling through a dozen reasons why it was too soon, too complicated, too risky to believe in forever again. Then she looked through the window at James and Thomas, who had abandoned their snow dinosaur in favor of having a snowball fight with themselves, their laughter carrying across the yard like music. She thought about the woman she'd been 3 years ago, so afraid of taking up space that she'd rather disappear than fight for what she deserved. Then she thought about the woman she was now, the one who'd walked into a billionaire's birthday party and brought his empire crashing down. The one who'd chosen truth over safety and justice over convenience. That woman wasn't afraid of taking risks on love. "Yes," she said simply. Matthew's face lit up like sunrise. "Yes. Yes, I'll marry you. Yes, I want to build a life together. Yes to all of it." She held out her left hand, watching him slide the ring onto her finger with the reverence of someone who understood exactly how precious second chances could be. "But on one condition. Anything. No more secrets. No more games. No more protecting me from difficult truths." She caught his face in her hands, looking directly into those dark eyes that had seen too much pain but still believed in happy endings. "We do this as equals, or we don't do it at all." "Partners," he agreed, kissing her with the kind of joy that made her believe in fairy tales that actually came true. In everything. The sliding door burst open, and 2 snow-covered boys tumbled into the living room, bringing chaos and laughter and the particular energy that came from children who discovered the perfect morning for adventure. "Mama, Matthew, you gotta see our dinosaur. He's got 3 arms and a pine cone for a nose and—" James stopped mid-sentence, his eyes focusing on the ring sparkling on Scarlett's finger. "Mama, why are you wearing a pretty thing?" "Because," she said, pulling both boys close while Matthew wrapped his arms around all 3 of them. "Matthew asked me to marry him, and I said yes." "Does that mean he's gonna be our dad for real?" Thomas asked with the kind of serious consideration that only came from someone who'd learned not to take adult promises for granted. "If you want me to be," Matthew said quietly. "But only if you want me to be." James and Thomas exchanged one of those wordless conversations that twins seem to specialize in. Then James nodded decisively. "We want you to be our dad, but you have to promise to always make Mama happy." "I promise," Matthew said solemnly. "And you have to promise to keep being the best kids in the world." "Deal," Thomas said, then brightened with sudden inspiration. "Can we have pancakes now? And can we tell our dinosaur about the wedding?" As they headed toward the Kit Williams, Scarlett caught her reflection in the window. The woman looking back at her bore little resemblance to the one who'd fled Seattle 3 years ago. This woman had laugh lines around her eyes and confidence in her posture. She had calloused hands from building snow forts and tired shoulders from carrying children who knew they were loved. She looked, Scarlett realized, like someone who'd learned the difference between surviving and living. Her phone buzzed one last time, a message from an unknown number that made her blood run cold for exactly 1 second before she realized it wasn't a threat. "Congratulations on your engagement. The boys look happy. You all deserve every bit of joy you found. See." She showed the message to Matthew, who read it with raised eyebrows. "Think he means it?" he asked. Scarlett looked at her sons, now climbing onto kitchen stools to help make pancakes, their voices rising in excited chatter about wedding plans and whether dinosaurs could be ring-bearers. She thought about justice and forgiveness, about the difference between punishment and redemption. "I think," she said finally, "that doesn't matter anymore. What matters is this." She gestured toward the warm kitchen, the sounds of family, the life they'd built from the ashes of everything that had tried to destroy them. "This is what victory looks like." And it was beautiful. Later that evening, after the pancakes had been eaten and the snow dinosaur had been formally introduced to the engagement ring, after Christmas presents had been opened and nap times had been negotiated, Scarlett found herself standing in the doorway of the boys' bedroom watching Matthew read them a story about brave knights and wise dragons. James was already asleep, curled against Matthew's side with the complete trust that only came from knowing you were safe. Thomas was fighting sleep with the determined stubbornness of someone who didn't want such a perfect day to end. And they all lived happily ever after, Matthew concluded, closing the book and kissing Thomas's forehead. "Matthew." Thomas's voice was sleepy but serious. "Are we gonna live happily ever after too?" "I think we already are, buddy." As Matthew turned off the light and joined her in the hallway, Scarlett realized that happiness wasn't something you found at the end of the story. It was something you built, day by day, choice by choice, in the small moments when you decided to trust in love instead of fear. Outside, snow continued to fall on their little corner of Seattle, blanketing the world in fresh possibilities. And inside, a family that had been broken and rebuilt was settling in for the kind of quiet evening that felt like everything she'd ever wanted. The future stretched ahead of them, full of challenges and adventures and the ordinary magic of people who'd chosen to love each other completely. It was going to be extraordinary. What do you think about Scarlett's incredible journey from betrayal to triumph? Have you ever had to fight for what you believed in against impossible odds? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story moved you the way it moved me to write it, please hit that subscribe button so you never miss the next chapter of courage conquering everything that tries to break us down. Because sometimes the most beautiful endings are really just the beginning of something even more amazing.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed it, you will surely love the next one. It's as interesting and more intriguing than you can ever imagine.